Josh Bernson from ITS Workflow Team, and welcome to our webinar today on ServiceDesk Process Automation. Process automation in ServiceDesk 7.5 is one of the largest areas of improvement in the new product, but it's also an area a lot of people don't know about or even know how to get to. So we wanted to take some time today and show you a couple of nice features with process automation and how to do them. We're going to hit two major areas. The first one is we'd like to walk through a new hire process. It's a perfect example of many of the new features. So as we walk through the new hire process, we're going to show you how to send incidents to a workflow to have them, in this case, it's going to build several subtasks. We're going to look at the classification process because we need that as a trigger, and that'll show you some of the new features around importing and exporting classifications. Look at subtask templates. Subtasks have changed dramatically from previous versions of ServiceDesk. So we'll look at the subtask templates and how they're created, and finally we'll look at the automation rules themselves. So we'll go through all of these, and when we're done with these, we're going to look at a few other areas of process automation. But I'd like to jump right into the demo. We're going to keep this one slide light. I'd like to just start off by creating a new incident and showing you the feature that is new to 7.5 that was not possible without heavy customization in the previous one, and that is the ability to have a ticket create subtasks based on settings and based on values in the ticket creation process. So in my case, I'm going to create a ticket for a new hire, and based on the classification I choose, it's going to automatically create several subtasks. For those of you who have worked with ServiceDesk before, and if you haven't seen 7.5, the technician request form is very similar. There's only a few things that have changed as far as the UI goes. For those people who haven't seen it before, I'll walk you through it so that you get a feel for what's going on. As I go to create my incident, the first thing I need to do is select the affected user. We refer to them as primary contact in ServiceDesk. Once I've selected the affected user, I'm going to automatically select their location department as the location department of the ticket. And just so you can see that this is a feature, we can also take their assigned equipment and add it to the ticket as well. So in this case, we'll just make this a simple new hire. We have a new user who's coming into the organization, and in my case, I want it not to just create a simple ticket, but to create several additional tasks so the work gets started right away. I'm going to select new hire in my classification list and request as the type, and I'm going to create the ticket based on that information. This ticket that's being created is going through a series of routing rules, what we refer to now as process automation. And the process automation is checking a series of conditions and seeing if any of the rules match those conditions, and in my case, several did. I'm going to go take a look at the ticket itself so you can see what the result is, and then we'll walk through all the pieces that needed to be there in order for this to work. So again, if you haven't seen ServiceDesk 7.5, if you've only seen the previous versions, probably notice a lot of differences. There's a lot more information on the process view page, on the ticket page, than there used to be. One of the pieces of information we have is current assignments are all listed out separately. And if we go below that, we see our tasks and actions here on the right, and you'll notice not only do I have the main task, this new hire, where I can reassign the ticket and work the ticket, but I have three subtasks. I have this subtask up here that's been assigned to me. I'm logged in as the administrator currently. So that is the subtask to create the AD user. I have a subtask to image the computer for new hire, which has been assigned to technician 2. And I have the assigned computer hardware to user, which has also been assigned to technician 2. So I have used process automation to create multiple subtasks assigned to different people that all happened because of the new hire classification that I selected. In addition to that, if I look at the history at the left, you'll see that for each of those entries, I had a process message added with some additional information. And I'll show you how we're doing that as well. So I'd like to walk you through all the pieces that were necessary in order for my subtask to be created when the ticket was created. First thing I'd like to do is look at a workflow. There is a workflow requirement for this, but it is very minor, and it's based on a template. So if you haven't done a whole lot with workflow, don't worry about this one too much. It's not very involved. I needed a workflow to perform the tasks of creating those subtasks from a template. And so I have a workflow here, and I'm just going to walk through it at a very high level. This is actually based on a template, and at the end of the webinar, I'll give you the URL for the template from Symantec Connect. The first section, the first couple of steps here are getting the incident and making sure that there's actually an incident return that matches. And that's actually all part of the template. Most of the work that had to be done is what you see here in the bottom left, or bottom right, I'm sorry. What we needed to do is we needed to get all of the subtasks, all the subtask templates, which we'll look at here shortly. We need to get all the subtask templates from the system, and then I needed to filter them down to only keep the new hire subtask template. Once I have the new hire subtask template, I'm looping through all the subtasks. A template can contain multiple subtasks. In my case, it contains 3. So I'm going to loop through that subtask template, grab all the subtasks out of it, and for each subtask, I'm going to take the data and create a subtask on the ticket, and I'm going to build and save a message to the history. When I'm done, I'm going to save all that data back to the ticket. That's all that's involved. So I've taken this template, and the template itself is right here. This is the information that appears in the template from Symantec. I've taken that template, I've added those additional steps to create the subtask, and I then call this workflow as part of my process. So in addition to creating subtasks, I could have done the same thing to create a parent-child relationship, creating additional tickets and relating them back to the main one. Or, for that matter, I could have just created a series of unrelated tickets. This workflow, the template that Symantec provides, is intended for that exact purpose, to be able to be called from the rules engine, grab the information about the incident, and then do whatever you'd like to, as long as workflow is capable of it, do whatever you'd like to the ticket itself. So that's step 1. We needed to have this workflow published. It's actually published as a web service, so we call it as a web service. Once that's done, the next thing that we need to do is make sure that we have the classification for new hire. So this hasn't really changed a whole lot for anybody who's worked with workflow before, except we can now export and import our classifications. So classifications are all in the hierarchy data services. There's, out of the box, there's one set of classifications for incident management, called incident management. And in this case, I just added a classification called new hire. That's always been there. Adding and removing classifications has always been pretty easy, but one of the new features that I just wanted to show while I'm here is that we can now export an entire category and import a category. In the past, we had to either do this through the database, or we had to manually build the list if we're moving from a dev to a prod environment, for example, or we just wanted a backup. Now we have export import, save us a bit of time. Okay, so I needed a new category called new hire, new classification called new hire, so that I can select that and have a rule fire off of based on that. The next thing I need are my subtasks, my subtask template. So subtasks are now pulled out of the incident management process core and are available as a separate web form. So we can create a series of subtasks and subtask templates in a web form and then apply them to tickets. In my case, I only have one subtask template. You can create as many as you like. We'll go take a look at mine. Mine has 3 subtasks in it currently. So I have 3 subtasks, the 3 that you saw created. And in fact, I'm going to go through and create another subtask. This is very easy. I just click add task, and I only have 4 things I need for a subtask. The first one is the task title. So maybe as we bring on new users, we probably need to give them a phone. We can give the task a priority, any of the built-in priorities. We can assign it a user, and we give it a description. In my case, I'll cheat. So that gets saved onto the subtask. Subtask template. The template can have as many subtasks as you'd like. For those people who use subtasks heavily in previous versions, not only have the subtasks, the template itself been brought out separate, so it's a lot easier to manage, but the way subtasks are applied to incidents is different. It's subtasks are they're called task actions for anybody who's really gotten into the workflow itself, or they're based off task actions. And it's a big advantage in workflow because task actions are incredibly light as far as database footprint. You can have a large number of task actions on a workflow and have very little impact on the performance of the system, in comparison to the way subtasks were built in previous versions, where a large number of subtasks on a ticket could really bog down that ticket. So by redesigning them how they have, they've increased the overall efficiency of ServiceDesk, and they've allowed us to have larger number of subtasks on one ticket. So I have my updated subtask template, and you would, in this case, you would need at least one called new hire. That's the one I'm targeting in my workflow. And then the last piece that we need is the actual rule. It's actually going to pull all these pieces together. So I'm going to go into process automation, and this is kind of the point of our webinar. I wanted to talk about all the things that we can now do in process automation. Process automation at a basic level has been around since ServiceDesk 7.1. It's been enhanced significantly in this version. So change management and incident management both have a series of rule sets for process automation. We're going to focus on the incident management rule sets. If you go back one version, we had a total of 3 rule sets we could fire. We could fire on a new ticket when it was created. We could route new ticket. We could reroute a ticket if the assignments were changed or properties were changed, and we could escalate a ticket if it had exceeded SLA. We now have out of the box 13 rule sets, 13 points in the process where we can fire a rule. And there's actually the ability to create about 4 or 5 more based on certain data changes. So we have a lot more that we can do with the rules engine, with the process automation, just from the fact that we can now hit almost every point in the incident process. We can trigger something to happen. You can see here the rule set name gives you an idea of where that fires. In our case, we are doing these on the rule on incident receive, which is the rule set that you use most of the time. Because this is where a new incident has been created, and we're usually going to use this to do things like set SLA, which you see here up at the top, which comes out of the box, to send the email to the primary contact to tell them the ticket was created, or send it to the assignees to tell them they've been assigned to a task, and to do the routing itself. In this case, we've created a rule to call this web service, this workflow. And so let's take a look at what the rules look like. The rules themselves have been enhanced quite a bit as well. We now have the ability to have very complex grouping of conditions and multiple actions. So when we're building a rule, we have 2 pieces that we really need. We need a condition. We need some trigger to say that the rule applies to this particular ticket, and we need an action. What is it going to do if it does apply to the ticket? In the case of the condition, we have a large number of conditions. I'll just click Add Conditions so that you can see what the list includes. So these are all triggers that we can use, all the conditions that we can use to determine if this rule should apply to a particular ticket. And in many cases of these, they have subconditions. So for example, if I choose classification, I can then decide, is there a classification at all? Is it a very specific and exact classification? Or is it a subclassification of? So if it's, in my case, it might be new hire and everything below new hire. And we can use grouping to have a combination of ands, ors, and not statements. So we can get very specific and very granular with our conditions. In this case, I've created a single condition. The classification is specific new hire. So any ticket that has a classification of exact new hire would trip this rule. In the case of actions, I can have multiple actions now as well as multiple conditions. So I can have a particular classification like new hire could have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 things all apply to it, and I could just have a series of actions on that same rule. In my case, I've kept it pretty simple here. I've created just a single action. I did want to show you the actions that are available, though, while we're here. So these are all the actions that you can perform. So they've grown quite a bit beyond just routing. We have many of the data fields can be changed. All the notification is taking place here. SLAs are now taking place in the rules engine, as well as setting permissions and setting assignments. In my case, I used a very special action called send incident to workflow. What this action allows you to do is call a web service. And the assumption is that you're going to call a web service you created yourself with workflow, which is what we did. We created a web service called new hire Subtasks, which was based off Symantec's template. And when we provided the information here, we have to give it the URL, so wherever it was published, and we also have to give it the web service name and the web service method name. These two, I'll show you the workflow where these come from. If we go back to our workflow, and we go up to the top level of our workflow, up to the workflow, the project name, and go to the publishing tab, we can see the service name and the method name appear here under primary service. Those are exactly the 2 values that need to be plugged in here. So you need to publish the workflow as a web service, and then provide the web service name and web service method. These 3 pieces of information are what the rules engine, the process automation, needs in order to call the exact method in that workflow. It passes a single variable in, and you'll notice I'm not telling it what data is being passed into that workflow. It always passes a single variable in, and I can look at that by looking at the workflow, called incident session ID. And that incident session ID is the GUID for the ticket. If you use the template as a starting point, this is here already, so you don't need to worry about it. So what I have then is I have a rule that triggers on any ticket that has the classification of new hire. And what it does is it calls a web service that I've created with workflow that adds subtasks based on the new hire template. This rule will check that condition for every ticket that's created, and it'll check just one time on incident received. So now that I have all the pieces together, let's go through the process again of submitting an incident, and we can talk through it as to what's happening. So I'll start off by filling in my information again. I have one of my test users, set my location department, the description. And the important part here is that I have to select new hire. So the reason new hire is in the list is because I added it in my classification hierarchy. And the fact that I chose new hire is what's going to trigger that rule. It'll be the condition for that rule to tell it to add the subtask. So I click create ticket. When I click create ticket, it's calling the workflow to create the incident. And as it goes through the rules engine, it will notice that this ticket matches a ticket of classification new hire, and then it will add the additional 3 tasks. And actually, in this case, it'll add 4 tasks because we added that other one to the template. So if we go into ticket 21, see there actually are now 4 subtasks. Excuse me. 4 subtasks in addition to the main task on the ticket. And in case anybody was wondering, this subtask here is in a different color and up top because it is actually assigned to me. The rest of these subtasks are not assigned to me. They are assigned to other groups or users. One minor change in 7.5 is that the work task assigned to others box is automatically checked if you have the right to work tasks for others. In the past, the box would be unchecked by default, which means that anybody who needed to work tasks for others had to go and manually check it. It is now checked by default, just a minor convenience. That is a setting that can be changed, though. So if you prefer your tickets to open up this way, where you only have your task to work and all the other ones are collapsed, and then you have to click the checkbox to enable them, that's an option, an optional change on the page. One last thing that I wanted to show you on the page was when the rules fire, there is a process message that has information about all of those rules. And so you can use this for troubleshooting to see if a rule should have fired when it didn't. In our case, if I look through the rules, I will see here Rule 3, if classification is specific new hire, and you'll notice that it has 1 successful action. So the condition was met, and it succeeded in firing the 1 action that was applied. So that's the new hire process. We hit the 4 items that I showed here. Again, the send incident to workflow template, and when we get to the end of the slide deck, I'll have the URL for the template itself. Classifications, we looked at the new hire classification and the ability to import and export them. We looked at how subtask templates are managed now in 7.5, and we also took a brief look at the automation rules. I do want to look at several other features related to process automation that'll get us back in those rules, so you'll get to see some more information on those rules. So we're going to take a look at email templates, how it's changed where email is managed. This is a pretty big change in 7.5. Same with SLA, another big change. Both email templates and SLA have been moved to the process automation section of the rules engine. We'll also talk about data mapping, which is a convenient way to handle routing on things like classification and location. And then finally, if we have time, and I think we will, I want to talk about one other template that Symantec is providing to give you access to process type actions. I'm going to go back in process automation, back in incident management, and the first thing I wanted to talk about are email templates. Prior to ServiceDesk 7.5, emails were sent either because they were directly in the process, there was workflow components that would trigger an email to be fired at certain points. For example, when a ticket was assigned to somebody, or because they were in the email templates model, which was another workflow project, and those were the ones called when you used the send email functions inside Incident, when you manually sent them. Those emails have all been moved outside of the workflow into the rules engine here, into email templates, which means a couple of things. First of all, it means you don't need to know workflow to modify your email templates. It also means that you can make changes to email templates without having to republish projects. Environments that have heavy change management requirements probably find this a lot easier to handle. The other thing it means, though, is that you're not going to start with nearly as many emails right off the bat. ServiceDesk prior to 7.5 had about maybe half a dozen emails that could fire in different places, and then a few extra ones that were less common. But on your average ticket, you could have half a dozen emails fire from beginning to end. Some people liked the fact that they were all there. Some people found it a major inconvenience because they would go in and modify the workflow and turn them off. Now we have to build those. So it's the responsibility as we set up ServiceDesk to go and build those emails exactly the ones we want and where we want them. So we have total control over it. We don't have to worry about editing workflow projects and trying to find the right version of that email. We do have to take the time and set those emails up. In my case, I've created 2 emails just to give you examples. So we can take a look at what they look like. The email templates are added right here. For every email template, we need to give it a name and description, but this is just internal use. The user who receives the email won't see either of these. We have the from address, the subject, and the body. In all three of these, you can use any of the variables you see over here on the left. So you can mix static text and variables. In the case of this one, if, for example, I wanted to have the close code in the body, I would choose body and choose close code. After you've worked with it for a little bit, you get used to the format, and you can just start typing them without having to go find the variables, as long as you know what their names are. But I could do this and display the close code as part of the email. You'll notice you have your standard HTML formatting controls, so you can do some basic HTML formatting, including adding links. One important note with email templates is there's a bit of a separation between process event and data event. Most of the rules in process automation are process events. That means that they fire at a very specific point in the process. For example, when an incident is opened or when it's closed. But there are a set of data events that have been added in 7.5 that are not based on a specific spot in the workflow, but based on a data change. For example, all of the SLA events are triggered on an SLA change, so when the SLA value changes, and that's a data event. You need different sets of email templates from one to the other. Most of your email templates will be process events. You fire an email because your ticket hit a certain point in the process, but you will have some that are data events. Those require a different template. You would just build a template, you would choose data event instead of process event, and that will modify the available variables slightly so that they can be fired during process events or data events, one or the other. So you just have to keep that in mind as you build templates. You'll need to know where you plan to use the email, whether it's a process event or a data event. And I'll show you in just a minute how you can tell the difference. So you would build your series of templates, and these templates are used both in the automation, so firing off an email when the ticket hits a certain point in the process, for example, are also the templates that are available when someone goes to use the send email function. So the templates are used in both cases. Once you've built your email templates, you can go back to the rule sets to determine when they're fired. So I mentioned that there are emails for data events and process events. You can see that here when you look at the individual rule sets. They tell you if they're a process event or a data event, so you know which one you're working. The on incident received, again, a very common place to build rules, probably the most common place to build rules. And here we already have an example of send email, so I'll take a look at that one. In this case, we're using the condition any, which means any ticket that hits this rule will trip it. As an action, we have our send email, and we pick our main action type as send email. We have these are our possible targets in send email, and then we can pick any of the templates that match that type of rule set. So if this was a data rule set, it would only show the templates that match a data rule set, a process rule set, and the ones that match a process rule set. And so that's all there is to it. When you're building a rule to send email, you build the template first, then you build your rule, decide what conditions are going to trigger that rule to fire, or sorry, trigger that rule to match, to be a match, and then the action is simply send the email. And since you can have multiple actions, you could have a rule that triggered off of a certain classification, for example, and then sent multiple emails to different groups if you wanted them to get a different email for each group. Next, I wanted to take a look at SLA. Like email templates, SLA, there's a little bit of pre-work you need to do on SLA. So SLA used to also be in the workflow itself. Editing the timers for SLA were all done in the workflow. Extending SLA beyond priority could be a lot of workflow work. SLAs have also been moved up into the rules engine. Not only does that make them easier to work with, but it gives you a major advantage in that you can have SLAs target only certain tickets. So you could have tickets that have no SLA values, tickets that have just late SLA values, and then other tickets that have late and warn SLA values. There's 3 pieces to SLA. Fortunately, you're only going to need to edit one of them. But I want to show you all 3 pieces. The first piece are the SLA milestones. So ServiceDesk comes with 2 SLA milestones by default. There is the ability to build additional ones. As far as ServiceDesk is concerned, these are the 2 that are used normally. We have resolution and initial response. And so these are the points at which SLA will be checked against. If you build SLAs for resolution, then the SLA timer will continue to run until the ticket is in a resolved state. If you build SLAs against initial response, the timer will continue to run until one of a series of events have been triggered that consider it a response. For example, somebody adding a comment, reassigning a ticket, and so on. And again, you don't normally need to edit the milestones. These 2 need to be there for the system to work. They come out of the box. Fortunately, all the SLA information you're going to see is out of the box. So out of the box, you do have SLAs enabled, but you can edit them going forward. So milestones, we have 2 milestones. They're there out of the box for you. We have 2 escalations, which are there out of the box, and you don't normally need to edit these either. You have late and warn. So as you build SLAs for your tickets, you can choose to have just one or both of these. As we'll see when we get to the rules themselves, only late is enabled by default. But you have both of these escalations to target. So for example, at a warn level, you may want to create a rule that sends an email just reminding people to work the ticket. And then at a late state, you may want to create a rule that reassigns the ticket to a manager or another group. Finally, we get to SLA levels, and this is where you'll need to start editing. This is where you actually set the time, the duration, to go along with the milestone and escalation. And you'll notice that the milestone and escalation are used together to create the level. So initial response late is one level, initial response late. You'll see that in this case we're targeting these against priority. Initial response late and resolution late. So out of the box, there are 4 initial response SLA times and 4 resolution times, all set to late. But you can add as many of these as you want, and then you use them when you target, when you build a rule to target them, which we're going to look at next. So this is the pre-work. You don't normally need to do anything with SLA milestones or escalation, but you do want to set your SLA levels and determine how long a late and a warn is based on those different priorities or whatever condition you're using. Once you have your SLA levels set the way you want them, then we can go back to the rule sets. And in the rule sets, actually there's one there already, you have 2 things you need to do with SLA. One is to set them, and the other one is to trigger off of them. So out of the box, there's already a single rule that applies to any and sets the late SLAs. Let's take a look at that first. The condition here again is any, so every ticket that reaches this point will set these SLAs. And there are 2 actions. One action is to set the SLA for initial response, and the other one is to set the SLA for resolution. So this is here out of the box already, but because of the condition, you could decide to target this only at some tickets. If you don't want every ticket in your organization to have SLA timers, only certain tickets, maybe only tickets that have a certain priority or only tickets assigned to a VIP, you would change the condition. And before we look at the other pieces, I want to take an opportunity, we'll come back to this in a minute, I want to take an opportunity to look at a ticket and show you where that SLA information is now shown in the ticket. So if I take a look at the ticket that we created most recently, when this comes up, we'll see in the upper right-hand corner, we have our SLA information. This is now exposed by default right at the top. So I see my resolution SLA. I can see that its level is normal. The late level is normal, which means it was a normal priority that triggered it. If I look at my, oh no, I'm sorry, it's in a normal state. Sorry about that. It's in a normal state currently. Its status is working, which means it has not exceeded. I'm going to go back to an older ticket. I should have several in here that are older, so you can see what one looks like that has gone past its SLA. So we can see that this one's initial response has reached the status of late. So what do we do with that? Other than it showing up on the screen and telling us, we can target rules against that information. Back to the service dashboard, you'll notice these 2 data events that are here out of the box are SLA data events. And I don't have any rules in there, so I just want to talk to these for just a minute. The idea behind on any SLA missed is when that SLA hit the late state, when it went to late, a rule, this data event would fire. Any rule in this data event would fire. So I build a rule, for example, if I go in here, I can add a condition. I can either target any and say, yeah, any ticket that misses any of its SLA dates, or I can start getting more granular and start targeting it based on the SLA that actually was missed, or maybe based on a classification. Or I could go based on my affected user is a VIP. And then I can use actions such as send email to maybe send it to the affected user, maybe send it to the owner of the ticket. And I don't have any data templates here, which is why it's not showing up in the list. I'd have to go create a data template. But it goes back to what I said. The templates for data are separate from templates for process. So that's why there's nothing showing up there in the list. So I can use this to send email. I could use this to grant ticket access. I could use this to reassign the current incident. So I could reassign it to a specific queue. So I can use the SLA to do any of the things that I can perform as action. I also have a very nice, on any SLA completed late. On any SLA completed late allows you to target specifically the tickets that when the ticket closed, the SLA had already reached a late state. So I can build separate rules from fire it right now because the SLA is late to just let me know at the end that this ticket came in late. So SLAs are, as they always are, they're a bit of work to get set up. But the nice thing here now is by moving them to the rules engine, we get a couple of major advantages. One, we don't have to mess with workflow at all to build our SLAs. Two, we can target machines or target tickets individually. So you don't have to have the same SLAs apply to every ticket in our system. We can simply build different rules for different classifications for VIP versus non-VIP for any of the conditions that are available to us. And third, by having them in the automation, the process automation, they survive upgrades. And I haven't really mentioned that, but that's one of the biggest advantages of process automation is it's database data. It's not a workflow project. It's not a file on the machine. It survives upgrades going forward, so you don't have to rebuild them with every new version. So there's one last thing in process automation that I wanted to show, and it looks like we'll have time. I can show you the one other template that Symantec is providing as well. So as we look at process automation, I went down to data mappings at the bottom. Data mappings gives us a couple of very convenient ways to manage routing and masks. So I can definitely create routing rules against most of the data on the ticket. But if I'm in an environment where I route heavily based on location, for example, I don't necessarily want to create 50 or 100 or 1,000 different rules for each of my locations. And so now we don't have to. We have routing tables against location and against classification. So I'll take a look at the routing table versus location. I don't have a whole lot in here. I've added a couple. It's pretty easy to add. In this case, you just need a key and a value. So my key 1 is my location name, and my value is the group, the queue, I should say, that it's going to be routed to. Or in this case, I've put in a couple of groups. One of the other nice things here is that I don't necessarily have to type them all in either, because I have the ability to import and export. So I can export the data mapping, and then I can import a data mapping. And it's really just a CSV format. So you can grab one, export it, you'll see the format, and then you can put your data in that format, import it, and you create an entire routing table. Once you have this data, and you can do that based on location or based on classification, then you can build a rule, one single rule, to use that entire table. So as the action to my rule, so I choose route incoming ticket, and then I can choose, am I going to route against a category routing table or a location routing table? Now this may look redundant for a second, because I'm going to choose location, and then notice that it makes me click location again. That's actually not redundant. The reason that's there is because I can create multiple location routing tables and multiple classification routing tables. So I can actually have different classification routing tables for different types of tickets. Out of the box, there are just the two, but when you go import them, it asks you, want to override an existing one or create a new one. You have to tell it, is it a category routing table type, or is it a location routing table type? So that's a way, if your environment is going to route heavily based on location or based on classification, it's much more convenient to use the data mapping. You may also have noticed that there was a third data mapping in there. The priority matrix is now a data mapping. So if you want to manage your priority matrix, if you plan to change your priority matrix, you can actually come here and change it. It is populated out of the box. You can modify key 1 and key 2 are urgency and impact. So you modify urgency, modify impact, and set your priority as long as you're using the values that your system is built for. So that's most of the new features in process automation. Now, there's a lot you can do with that. I just briefly touched on the different conditions and actions, and a lot of what you'll be doing in process automation is combining the right conditions and actions and getting them in the right order to get the automation that you want. There's one other piece. It's not exactly process automation, but it's related to these templates. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and show you. If you take a look at any ticket, there are a series of tasks that are called process actions. In previous to ServiceDesk 7.5, these were called others tasks, I believe. They're now referred to as process actions. And for those of you who have done some work on the actual page customization, they're technically called process type actions. These are a series of web forms that are exposed to workflow, to this ticket type. So I have process actions for incident, and I have process actions for change, and I have process actions for problem. Each one of these is a web form. They are basically standalone web form projects. They are usually built on workflow, though they don't technically have to be. And they are available on the ticket, whether the ticket is opened or closed or otherwise. As long as you have permissions to see them, you can see them and you can act on them. More things have been moved to process type actions than before. It's a convenient place to put them because you can edit these and have minimal impact during an upgrade. They're much easier to migrate from one version to the next than the main tasks here, which are all built right into the workflow. Also, because they're available after the ticket's closed, you can allow people to do things like send email, which is one of the most commonly used ones, after the fact. This is also a very common place for people to extend the functionality. You can extend the functionality of workflow without having to modify any of the built-in projects. You can create your own process type action and make it available in workflow. This has been there for a while. This isn't a new feature. What is new is that Symantec is now providing us a template. There are a couple of specific pieces of data that need to be there in order for these to work properly. And so Symantec has now provided us a template called process type action template. We can use this as a starting point, and it'll get us to the form that would display when we click that link, and then we can build that form to do whatever we want. For example, if you've added your own fields to incident management, you need a place to display them once a ticket is created so you can edit them. This is a perfect place to do it. So process type actions is one of the ways that we can continue to edit the workflow or edit the incident process without actually modifying any of the built-in projects, which makes it much easier to upgrade to a new version. So both of those templates, the last thing I wanted to show here, both of those templates are available from Symantec, and they're both available on Connect. The two URLs that I have here will bring you to a video giving you an example of how to use them, as well as a download of the template itself. Both of those templates are designed for ServiceDesk 7.5. So I want to leave this screen up so that anybody who needs to can copy down the URL, go take a look. I highly recommend downloading these two if you are working with ServiceDesk 7.5. I also highly recommend taking some time, playing with the new process automation, getting comfortable with the process of firing rules and ordering rules. There's a lot you can do now in ServiceDesk without ever touching the workflow, or at least with only minor changes to these simpler workflow projects. You get a lot of power out of the ServiceDesk without having to go to the extremes that we had to before. And it will upgrade better, which is a big deal for a lot of people. So hopefully you have learned something from our webinar. Thank you very much.